Hi,
Hey,
Linda.
Nancy, how are you?
Oh, so excited to be speaking to you. That's how I am, like absolutely excited and
Good.
so thrilled that we get to speak to such a powerhouse on this actually first, is it the first Monday of August?
I think it
Yeah,
is. I'm not
because
sure.
today's the 7th, so I think we've done well. So welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for making the time to join us.
Thanks for having me. It's also my first Instagram live, so I am a bit nervous. I stole my daughter's tripod and had to figure out how to do this ring light stuff. But yeah, so thanks for having me.
Well, you're certainly on top of it. I mean, you were on time, you were requesting on time, so we're really excited to have you. So let me just take a moment firstly to say hello to everyone who's joining from all over the world. Linda, as you know, this is a global platform. We have people joining us from every single corner, and every now and then they like to also just let us know where they are. So if you do want to do a bit of a shout out for your piece of the world where you're at, do shout out so that you know, we know that you're here. And then of course, the way that Mentorship Mondays works is that we get questions from the community, and they send questions about the things that they feel that you are the best mentor for, and we go through those. So here's all the list of questions I've got for you that we're going to be going through. As you might see, there are people saying I'm in Zambia. Someone says, hey, I'm in Botswana. Somebody says I'm in Philadelphia. So as I said, absolutely global, global platform. Really excited that you're here. Linda, one of my new favorite questions is asking people, what's your LinkedIn bio? How does it describe you, and how would you use that to describe what you do today?
Yeah, it's very formal. I think I like my Instagram bio more,
Okay.
but my LinkedIn bio says 100% Black female owned renewable energy developer and EPC contractor. So that, I suppose that's, oh, and we own one of Africa's largest wind farms. I think those are the, you know, three sentences that we've captured on that bio. It's quite wordy. But my Instagram one says equity, renewable energy, and enjoyment. I think it captures me a bit more.
Yeah, we love that. We love that. I think it's a little bit more holistic, and it's absolutely excellent. And I think, I mean, by way of introduction, we are, you know, we're thrilled that we're speaking to, you know, the owner of one of Africa's renewable energy farms, or largest wind farms in particular, the first Black woman to own a renewable energy power plant. You've won so many awards that, I mean, you are absolutely celebrated and decorated in many ways. But the conversation today is about, how does Linda lead with authenticity? What does that look like in a very male-dominated space? What does that look like as you take up your seats in boardrooms, amongst teams, in other contexts? What does leading with authenticity actually look like? So we want to move away from the fluff and get to the practical elements of, this is what this looks like, and this is how you journey towards becoming a more authentic leader yourself. So let me first start off with just a generic understanding of asking the question, why energy? Why was that something that's been important for you to journey towards?
So it's an interesting question to ask, specifically because of what's going on in West Africa at the current moment and on the continent. I call it the winds of change have finally come. So for me, I remember being 8 and picking up a book that had the map of Africa, and it had each country in Africa with what each country produces. And I remember seeing gold, diamonds in the DRC, oil in Nigeria, and all these other resources, yet we continued to be poor. So I was fascinated by this as a little girl, and I was an early reader, and I traveled the continent before I traveled the continent through books. And for me, I always knew I wanted to be involved in something that would increase the wealth of our continent, right? And I felt it had to do with how we manage our resources. So my initial inclination was towards either mining, because we had mines in South Africa, but I didn't feel that gave me a niche. So I thought about energy and electricity. But in particular, I thought about oil and gas because I got a scholarship for oil and gas to go to Scotland in Aberdeen. When I got there, I then got the opportunity to work for the Scottish government. They were developing their first offshore wind farm. And I was not employed in a technical role. I was employed as a lady that was there to do admin and paper cutting, literally. My job was to read the newspaper and cut out the relevant newspaper clips and file it. And it took an audacious conversation by the water fountain with the then CEO of this Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group. And I said to her that I think that their approach on something was incorrect. And she was intrigued, and it was about the board resolution. So she then asked me what I was studying. I told her I was studying my master's in law, in particular oil and gas law. And I told her about South Africa and the fact that we were having rolling blackouts. It was 2008. And I said, I want to learn as much as I can because I think my country can benefit from renewable energy. From there, I was promoted to being a project manager. And it happened to be the wind farm that Donald Trump was opposing because it was going to block his view for his golf estate that he was actually building in Aberdeen at the time. So one of my first roles was defending the wind farm against the litigation from Donald Trump. So that's how I got into renewable energy. But my biggest thing about why energy, if you look at it from a practical perspective, any functioning economy requires electricity to be able to work, right? And without electricity, we are not going to be able to produce goods. We're not going to be able to industrialize. We're not going to be able to educate. We're not going to be able to provide healthcare or infrastructure. So for me, I wanted to go where I could assist the most. We didn't have oil and gas in South Africa. So the next best thing was focusing on the power sector for me.
So I think I think it's an excellent intro into the conversation we're wanting to have, because oftentimes I think in trying to lead authentically, we're always having that negotiation about, should I say what I really think? And the courage for you to go to the then CEO and say, I think you've got it wrong, in itself is a display of authenticity. Because I think oftentimes people think, when we talk about authentic leadership, it's only for people who are in leadership positions, who then, in the way they engage with their followers, then have to be authentic. But it also is about being authentic on your way to your next destination, right?
Most definitely. I spent the first part of my career at a law firm. So I'm a qualified lawyer, and anyone who's worked in a law firm knows the formality of the legal profession. So I used to hate going into the office. I'd have to put on this mask, right? And anyone who says that they haven't had to put up some form of a mask, well, they're very privileged. But all of us, some way, have navigated that fight between our authentic selves and what society expects of us from a professional perspective. So the earlier part of my career, I went into this law firm environment as not myself. So Aberdeen was a rebellion. Aberdeen was a space in which I got to explore who I was. I got to really explore my views on politics, on business, on who I wanted to be. And I'm lucky to have done it, having experienced that very strict law firm environment. Because I spent so much of my time working, right? I learned early on that it wasn't going to work putting up the facade continuously, especially in a work environment. And this is not to say that you don't restrict or limit who has access to what of you, right? Authentic leadership doesn't mean you're just an open, fountain for everyone. You must still have boundaries and accessibility, but at the same time, what I'm saying about authentic leadership means that you can't always be on. You know what I mean? It's exhausting, especially if you're going to be brilliant at your work, because it means spending a lot of time working. And at some point, the mask will fall off. And also, I think people mistake authentic leadership to being a pushover and to being nice. and being receptive. So I always say, yes, whilst I'm an authentic leader, I navigate between the various leadership styles. So I'm also a visionary leader. I'm also a democratic leader. And then sometimes people can say I'm also autocratic, because at the end of the day, people look to you to make a decision. So I'm not always going to be consulting everyone and saying, okay, come, let's all reach consensus. You know, at some point, someone has to take the lead and say, this is how we're moving the ship forward.
Sure. So before I get to the questions, you've triggered something that I think is so important, and that is one of the misconceptions about authentic leadership, as you say, is this confusion with niceness and absolute accessibility, and not also realizing that you may be authentic around the things that people are not going to like. So, for example, it's very important that we are able to distinguish between being a leader that I like at all times in all contexts versus a leader who shows up as themselves in every contextual or situational context that leadership calls on. So I think you've made that distinction quite well, and I was seeing some reactions to that. Faith is saying, this is so true, Linda. Situational, contextual leadership is what we're actually looking for, and showing up as yourself. Talk to me a little bit about the mask, because my experience is that we often come across people who give us permission to take off the mask. People who are intentional about really seeing us for who we are. Have you had an experience of moments or people or experiences that gave you permission to say, actually, I'm actually going to show up as my full self?
I don't know if anyone necessarily said, hey, show up. I'm talking now in a business context. I'm not talking socially. And we as Black women in particular suffer a lot from imposter syndrome. I remember a lot in my earlier times in my career, especially when I started the business, I'd be in rooms which I never imagined being in, right? And you almost behave in a way, you want to behave in a way that is proper for the room or for the occasion. But I realized what made me likable was being myself. I've got a great sense of humor. I'm very sharp with it. I'm sarcastic. I get to it. And I'm also approachable. And I say to myself, and I made a promise to myself from then, that people deserve to see themselves in these rooms as themselves, not that you must assimilate to be in those rooms. Because if you look at the generation before us, and I'm not talking across board, right? I'm just saying in some contexts, especially in the law firm environment, the women that made partnership looked a certain way, spoke a certain way, and behaved in a certain way. You know what I mean? And for me, I wanted to show, and that's why I use my social media a lot to show that you can sit on the board of Oxford and still jam to Amapiano and still, you know, and still have a life outside of work. You know what I mean? Whereas in the law firm environment, for me, it felt very constricted. You'll see you won't see a number of law firm partners with profiles on social media because that context doesn't allow for that, right? And even if you can say a person wants to be authentic, you also need to be cognizant of, unfortunately, the environment in which you operate until people begin to be brave enough to say, I am showing up as myself and I'm going to change the narrative even of this profession. So there wasn't ever anyone giving me permission. It was just me feeling bad that I had not shown up fully as myself in a particular context when I had the opportunity.
So let me squeeze one more in, Linda, and then I'm going to get to the questions. The other side of authentic leadership is that sometimes people say it's used as an excuse by toxic leaders to say, well, I'm showing up as my authentic self. Well, would you rather that, or would you rather me pretend to be, you know, all soft and all of that? And it's almost like, you know, when people say, you know, I just say it like it is, when they say really mean things.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So what are your thoughts on that?
I think every leader should be held accountable, right, for their behavior. It's not, you're not going to just hide behind a leadership style. But I think also we need to be realistic. I think there's this misconception that leaders are always these people who've got it together. So there's a friend of mine who's a very successful CEO. She put up one quote, and she was like, a leader is the one who sees the road ahead. I don't know the full quote, or we see the road ahead, we're calm. I said, no, we're not. Actually, we are a hot mess. We are petrified of failing. We are usually very insecure people. But what we are is we are brave enough to still proceed even when we are scared, right? So for me, I think any leadership style, if you are not a good person, if you're a mean person, it's not about the leadership style, it's just about you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can't use authenticity as a means of toxicity. But I also think it's very important to say the feedback is not only towards leaders, it's also towards the teams. And I tend to find that there's a very unrealistic measure put on leadership, right? And there's no sort of feedback given back to the people that you lead not in a looking down manner, but in a manner of saying, this, I always say to my team, I can't win without you, right? So everyone putting in the 100%, the 100% won't come from Linda alone. Linda is an individual. You know, I need 10 of you, 50 of you pulling the ship in the right direction as well. So yeah, I think that leaders are not super gods or demigods on this earth. We are just individuals who are also trying to figure it out.
I absolutely I love that phrase that you just used. I can't win without you. I think it's absolutely so powerful listening to you say that. And it reminds me of a Kenyan runner. His name is Eliud Kipchoge, and his line is 100% of myself is nothing compared to 1% of my team. And, you know, it really is that spirit of saying we really need people with us as we move along. So let me pick up some of the questions that have come through. There's a question from Sharon. Sharon is like, look, the energy industry is traditionally male dominated. How has your authenticity as a female leader been challenged? And how's your authenticity as a female leader challenged and reshaped stereotypes within the field?
Easy one. I can think back to my first deal. You see, again, that thing of people mistake politeness, manners, and how can I say, patience for stupidity sometimes, right? And I remember this because it was my first transaction. So I think it's important to tell this story for two reasons. When you occupy a certain level of success in people's minds, right? People place you, they peg you on where you can go. And they're quite comfortable to maybe open the door a bit for you if they don't see you as a threat. So they measure your success up to this point. Where the problem begins is when you now exceed their expectation. And when you start to demand what is actually equitable, what is actually yours and what you are entitled to. And how that became challenged for me is, for example, as a Black woman in this space, was saying, great, you have us as a Black partner, but we're not a silent Black partner, we're an operational Black partner. And this is the scope of work we are equipped to do, and we expect to do, and we expect to be paid to do. People don't like that. People want the typical silent BE partners, and that's not us, right? It's been challenged where people don't like that you understand how to read the financial models, you understand the flow of funds. People don't like that you understand the agreements, you know you're being cheated here and there. People don't like that. So authenticity also means that do you silently take a check and keep quiet and have a peaceful right, but not an equitable right? Or do you fight for what is yours and your value system? Because for me, if we go back to the start of the conversation, I've always been obsessed on how Africans can own these things, produce these things, own our economies, build our economies, and not just be bystanders as the West makes, or the global North makes money off of us. So that doesn't rub people the right way sometimes.
So your opening line is sometimes manners and sometimes patience can be mistaken for stupidity. And I just, and you go on to describe how the process of being pegged, and it's so real as I'm listening listening to you say that, because there is a box that everybody has nicely prepared for you. And even if it's a box that is highly elevated, it is a box nonetheless. And it has a roof and it has a cap in terms of what they think a person like you should be able to go, how far they think you should be able to go. And it's interesting to hear you, in terms of authentic leadership, talk about how actually boxing out of that box is actually just about being yourself, and not holding back from the things that you do know and that you do understand, and using your voice to do that. Let me pick up another question. There is a beautiful question from Masejo. Masejo is asking, how do you maintain your authenticity or your authentic leadership approach in a competitive and sometimes conformist business landscape? I'm more interested in the competitive landscape, because one of the things I always talk about, I always say, can we please stop with this thing that women are all nurturing, all collaborative, all kumbaya? If we are in a competitive environment, trust and believe I'm coming for you, because this is business and I need to make sure that I get the deal. So how do you maybe let me say not remain, let me say, how do you tap into that authenticity even as you are vying for whatever the outcome may be in a competitive moment?
I'm giving away my trade secrets, but I'm joking. But honestly speaking, I rely a lot on people's bias. And I'll tell you why that. Because, like I said earlier, people place you in a box or people underestimate you. And being underestimated has worked very well for me, because a lot of the people never saw me coming, if I can say it that way. They place, because you're an authentic leader, you're nice, you give things, you're collaborative, they think this one is not capable of being competitive, and I am. I mean, you don't get to where I am without being a competitive leader, but not sneaky, but competitive, if I can say it that way. But it helps me that people naturally see women as nurturers, naturally see women as not having desires or ambition, you see. And we do have ambition, we do have desires. And how I've managed is I am authentic, but if you read my authenticity again as stupidity or naivety, that's your loss. And many people have lost that game with me in the boardroom, because they thought I wasn't well versed on the agreements, I wasn't well versed on the transaction. And when it came time to deliver, I delivered, and they didn't. So it's a matter of really also not overstating your hand. Those are the basic rules of business 101. Don't tell people what your next move is. Don't sort of but over and above playing games, which I don't do, I rely on people's vulnerabilities in the sense of they have biases. I show up as myself, and I rely on myself being the best, and I prepare and I over prepare at times for things so that I can be successful. So authenticity doesn't mean that you lack the ambition or competitive edge that your counterparts have.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, because I mean, as I was reading Masejo's question, it's interesting to me that the question is phrased as if it is difficult to be authentic in a competitive moment. And I think the two are not mutually exclusive, right? So it's really interesting to listen to you, you know, paint the picture in the way that you have. Stalo's question is slightly different. Stalo says, look, Linda, authenticity requires vulnerability. Can you recall a moment when you had to admit a mistake to your team? How then did it impact the dynamic of not only your leadership, but your interaction with your team from there on?
Okay, and again, I hate having to preface the law firm environment, but it's foundational to who I am today. Attention to detail, long working hours, being brutal to yourself, you know, because you're being judged by how well you draft your last transaction, all these things. What that did is it set the bar for me very high, right? So even in terms of writing and how I communicate and present. But one thing I didn't like about that environment is the inability of the leaders to say, I made a mistake. They would always push it down to the junior. Me, I'm very, very giving with my I'm sorries. When I've made a mistake, I apologize right down to my PA. I apologize to my kids. Because I'm sorry liberates you from anything. It's an end of discussion. You've offended someone. I am sorry. And I hope you are genuine about it. But at least you've offered that apology. But it also shows that you're human. I don't purport that I am a CEO who knows it all. In fact, I love it when my team knows more than me. So today, like I said, even my PR lady, she was like, do you know how to use Instagram Live? I'm like, I don't. It's the first time I'm doing it. Teach me. My husband had to come and help me with the tripod. But what I'm trying to say is you have to still remain teachable. And one thing I've seen in the younger generation, right? When you do give back constructive criticism, not abusive, toxic criticism, but constructive criticism, they take offense, you see. And I'm not saying everyone, because it varies according to individuals. But when I do get something wrong, I'm still the leader who'll go back and say, guys, I got this wrong. If you choose to undermine me and say, oh, she's gotten so many things wrong or whatever, that's because that's the thing that's the downfall when you look at the advantages and disadvantages of authentic leadership is that you may lose credibility amongst your team if you over apologize, right? But I don't see it that way. I see it as I'm human. I too am on a learning journey and continue to be. There are things that I'm excellent at and I don't have any insecurities about those. But there are things I'm not good at and it's okay to own that. You know what I'm trying to say? And everyone makes mistakes. I mean, I don't know why people struggle with saying I'm sorry and move on.
Sure. Yeah. Remain teachable. I'm sorry. Apologize all the way down to your children, all the way down to your PA. But you've made another comment that I think just stands out for me, and that's the comment of the current generation that we are employing in our businesses. And the fragility to feedback, if I can call it that. You give feedback and you get labeled as toxic because you've said something is not good enough.
Yes.
So how do you, as a leader, how are you balancing that? You know, giving authentic feedback because you are vested in making sure that this person gets better, and this rather fragile space we find ourselves in where anything that is not a glowing report is seen as toxic, harmful to my mental health, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I can't imagine the number of times in interviews, like the favorite questions we are always asked, is this a toxic work environment? I love that this generation is woke. We could never in our times interviewing for a top organization asking them about toxicity. No, my thing is this, right? I have very honest conversations with that. And this is something I'll speak as something as recent with one of my team members who has shot the light on certain things. And I tell her and I celebrate and I say, you've done very well on this and very well on that. So I think it's also important to affirm people where they have done well, right? And like I said, as easily as I apologize, as easily as I compliment. However, nothing irks me more when a person does not apply themselves. I hold myself to such a high standard. I really do, because I know what we're competing against as a Black business, and I know how we are viewed. So when people come to you, then I wanted to build a business whereby, yes, we are a Black-owned business, but people are coming to us because we offer a great service first and foremost, you know? So I always say to my team, you need to be so excellent. I'm not training you to be here for the rest of your lives. I'm training you to start your own DLOs. I'm training you to go forth and be, you know, fabulous in other organizations. Rise, right? The more of you that are out there that say you train for me, better for me, the better for my kids, the better for, you know, like it's better for yourselves as well. But I don't hold back on the constructive criticism. I think it is a disservice to people to tell them work is good when it is not. It is important for you to know you have done badly, and this is where you have done badly. And especially for me, where things are obvious. So an example, if you're doing a contact list and you're saying you don't have X's phone number, but you spoke to X yesterday, how is that possible? Do you understand? I mean, these are some obvious things. And I'm like, by the time work comes to me or a question comes to me, make sure you've applied your mind. Don't come to me with the first thought. Make sure you've really applied your mind and applied yourself. Not for me, but for yourself. You know, that's the way I have it. And no, people will not like it. But I think that the ones who are serious about themselves and their careers understand. And it's also about the delivery, as I've learned, because I've also had to learn as a leader. Sometimes my delivery was not great. I've had to learn over the years to fine-tune how I deliver that message, but still get the message across.
So let me sneak a question in. How do you deal with not being liked? Because as a leader, you're not going to be liked all the time, and in fact, you're not leading to be liked as far as I'm concerned. You're leading because there's a particular objective that you're trying to get a group of people and a group of resources to move towards. And inevitably, especially if part of your leadership style is to use your voice, part of your leadership style is to give feedback, you are going to land on some people's not nice lists. How does Linda engage with the reality of just not being liked at times?
I honestly have never aspired to necessarily being liked. I'm not saying I have aspired to not be liked, but it's never been top of mind. I've always aspired to being the best and being a good human being and being myself. So likability came naturally, where people either identify with me or like my sense of humor or like what I'm doing or like me as a person. But being liked has never been at the forefront. In a business setting in particular, I don't expect to be liked because there's competing interests. It's not personal. Usually when people don't like you, it's because you're in direct opposition of the objective that they are trying to achieve, you see. You're challenging their status quo, you're challenging what they want to achieve. It's not really personal, you know what I mean? So once you remove yourself and understand that it's got nothing to do with you personally, then you don't take such great offense to it. And I think that when we lead as women, sometimes we're too wanting to be likable to everyone.
Yeah.
And no, I think where it came from for me as well, my first encounter, like I said, in the first business in my early 20s was such a rough ride. I grew a thick skin, you know, quite quickly because I wasn't liked because I was in direct opposition of what my partners wanted for themselves, which was directly opposed to what the agreement said and directly opposed to what my own personal ambitions were as well. So once you get over that not being liked, yeah.
So I want to build on this topic a little bit, and maybe not from the perspective of a leader, but I want us to put our hats on and think about, you know, young professionals stepping into corporate spaces in South Africa, especially spaces where the culture is steeped in whiteness, you know, because I think whiteness can be a culture in you know, in
Yes.
a way. And what tends to happen, Linda, is that people realize very quickly that they need to assimilate. So they need to sound like the people who work here. They kind of look at who here is making it, and they very quickly see the prototype. And once they have identified the prototype, they try to be it. And that oftentimes means less of me, more of something else, change the way I speak, change the way I dress, but, you know, all of these kind of things. What do you say to these young professionals who are coming in and saying, yeah, but I want to make it? And right now, coming in as Uno Zipo, the way she is, isn't what success looks like here. And so I find that I'm having to negotiate who I am every time I step in through the door, because I'm trying to, you know, I'm trying to make it in this place. What do you say to these young professionals?
This is so triggering in the sense that it takes me back to my young professional self in that law firm environment. And I think the older generation fails sometimes the younger generation in that respect. So the older Black partners in that law firm, for me, had failed in taking up space and had failed in making it okay to be Black in that environment, in the true sense of the word. I mean, right down to not using their real African names, if you know what I mean, you know. But somehow, and I don't know how I did it, I would rock up in my Xhosa gear on a Friday when we had like casual Friday. I don't know how. I honestly, I don't know how I did it. Now that I look back to how crazy that environment was and how toxic it was. But for me, I say to anyone, and that's why I try with my page to really show everyone every side of myself where I can, right? What I want to share is that continue to be yourselves even in those environments, because you're not going to succeed being a carbon copy of someone else, number one. And also, if you look at the most successful Black nation in the world, Nigerians, they rock up as themselves with their thick accents and with their headgear and their traditional regalia, and they just occupy space. They don't try to assimilate. Ours is a more complicated history, a more complicated journey, and I understand why people would want to sort of fit in. But I am finding more and more that doing that makes you bland and you're not actually going to stand out. And I'll use a very recent example. I'm part of a CEO's organization called YPO. And I was the only Black member in my forum group, and I was the only female. Immediately I was like, how is this going to work out? Because forum is meant to be a place where you share, you know, the challenges you're having personally, professionally, etc., right? But I literally showed up the way I'm speaking to you, the way I would speak to my girlfriends, because I just don't have time to be on anymore. I really don't. They will understand abone, nomleko, they'll understand bazan meter where I'm at, you know, like they'll understand piano when it's piano time for me. They will understand that I'm not going to try and make people comfortable. They also be comfortable around me and what makes me comfortable. So when you do that, people also adjust. Hey, that's what I realized. If you don't ask or if you don't demand, Abantu are going to remain not changing. So by being yourself, you are liberating not only yourself, but the next people who are going to come. So that people are going to, because also generally speaking, my foreign buddies had never had a female in the group. So when they'll say at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, I'm like, I've got swimming. I'm a mom of 3. I've got school runs and swimming. This is not going to work. If we are going to meet, it has to start at 4, or can we meet at a location closer to me, more convenient to me? If you don't speak up, nothing will change. So by being yourself, you don't know how many people you're liberating or how many systems you're changing.
So let me be difficult. And I mean, I actually love the point that you're making, how you're never fully conscious of the number of people watching and looking to you to give them permission to be themselves. And I mean, we always talk about flight, fright, and freeze. And I always say we forget the fourth four, which actually comes first, which is to flock. And flocking means that before we fight, before we flight, before we freeze, we flock towards the person that we think gives us the indication of what to do in this situation. So if I flock towards Linda, and then Linda turns around and is not her authentic self, it then tells me that in order for me to be okay, I need to not be myself. And if I see Linda being herself, I then go, oh, I can be myself in the response. And so I take very seriously the flocking mechanism and how many people flock in my direction when they need to make a very quick decision. The thing that I want to be difficult about is that as women, especially women leaders, we also get the criticism that once we arrive at whatever leadership position, we become men. And what we tend to do is that we become pseudo men, if I can call it that. And I'm keen to hear your thoughts on this, because there's a part of me that has seen exactly that in play, but there's also a part of me that says, this woman was this woman all along. I think maybe we just wanted to believe that there was something else because we have associated so many labels to what women in leadership actually look like. And so when they show up as themselves, as competitive and autocratic and decisive and all of that, we go, oh, she's become a man. What has your experience been of the pseudo men criticism that we sometimes get as women in leadership?
Firstly, I think this single narrative of what a woman is so dangerous, and it complicates our lives, you know, because women are complex, we're diverse, different desires, different ambitions, and different manners in which we show up, right? We all have feminine and masculine energy, and that becomes accentuated depending on the environment, and more, maybe some people have more masculine energy. But I think in a more linear way, if I can put it this way, is that I had an interesting chat with one of the prominent Black businesswomen in this country. And I said to her, why is it that women like yourself have not, with all due respect, driven the lift down? We don't get nomination on boards from yourselves. When I'm nominated for a board, it's usually from a white man.
Yeah.
My first upper hands have been from white men, not Black women. Why is it that we are not getting that support from you? And she said something that was maybe not a popular thing to say, but an honest thing to say for her, in her experience. She said to me, well, Linda, imagine the pressure of being the only Black woman on that board, right? And they say to nominate another Black female. Now, in our networks generally, we may not have the women we know from a work perspective, what are they capable of? So you're nominating a professional who you may not have intimate knowledge of their work, right? Because they won't necessarily always come from your immediate inner circle. Now, your vouching for that person is a reflection of your judgment as a member of the board. And inherently, that person's failure is also attributed to you. Now, do you think I'll go on a limb for a stranger when I am interested in collecting my check, protecting my position, and securing myself? Hard, but honest. And also a reflection of the scarcity mentality that still exists, that this is it. I've made it to this position. I need to hold on to this position. But for me, true power comes in pointing out how many CEOs, board members, or different strategic players have you put in that position. That's real power, because then you've got an army, right? Alone, just Linda. But when you can point and say, okay, there's Kandi, there's Nandi, there's, you know, you're pointing and you're saying, these are the women I've placed. Therefore, if I need to make a move now, I know I have 5 women on the JSE. You know what I mean? That I have personally placed.
Yeah.
That's true power for me. But because of the scarcity mentality, we still believe that it's so cool to be the only Black person on this dinner table or on this board. So that's the issue that, especially for me, I always say the generation before us. What I'm beginning to see is slowly this generation is starting to realize that they're not able to navigate these boardrooms alone. They're not able to impact any real change being there alone. And they're also starting to see that you're only as good as your network. Because when in a leadership position, we are consistently approached to give referrals. And if Linda doesn't have referrals of 10 people that are solid in her database, well, how useful are you? Because you're not going to take up all the board roles.
Yeah.
You're not going to take up all the opportunities. So for me, and then the last thing I will say is that as women, where we fail is building networks amongst ourselves from a business perspective. So those of us who do school runs, you'll speak about your kids, you'll speak about homework, the school play, the teachers. In that network is working mothers. There's a CEO of X, there's a CEO, a CFO, there's this one. But because we never talk professionally, we never really talk professionally. We'll discuss men, we'll discuss children, we'll discuss family, we'll discuss diets, but we don't discuss money. You know, even when you're intimate, if you think about your intimate girlfriends, how many have you done business with? How many have
and yet men do business with their friends because that's what they do all the time.
Absolutely. I can tell you, for my husband, his entire top 10 deck of business people are his friends.
Yeah.
As in, his clients are his friends, people he socializes with. And sometimes I'd feel resentful. I'm like, oh, why is it that it's so easy for you? For me, when I think networking, I think of having to go somewhere, be with people you don't know. But, you know, networking, as I've learned, there's so much power already immediately within your immediate circle. There really is, and not in the way in which you're thinking. So you may be, for example, if you're a speaker, right? You may have a friend who works in the legal department at Discovery, but that's a plug to getting a speaking engagement within Discovery, if navigated adequately. You see, or I have a friend who is in Toyota. Toyota needs electricity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's another way to navigate that space and get an opportunity. But we never see ourselves as opportunities because it's almost like, I don't know what it is about money and women and not having the two meet.
Yeah. And I think the most frustrating thing is that even when certain platforms position themselves as networking platforms, we arrive and the content of what is happening there is not pathways to deals. It's not pathways to collaborations. We go in and the content lets us down. And I think it's high time that we begin to go, if I'm going to get up and leave my home and go somewhere, keepers it has to translate into business, and it has to translate into something good. And then just like do a quick audit of the conversations with your friends, as you've said. Like we're not in constructive conversation, it appears. One of the things I want to talk to you a little bit about, you spoke about the previous generation maybe not doing such a good job about taking up space, and one of the things you've said indirectly is that perhaps it's not just about taking up space, it's also about expanding space. And that's where we become a little bit, we struggle a little bit, because this is when we need to actually put our neck on the block for someone and say, I'm going to create this opportunity for you. I'm going to bring you in. And I know this is a little bit outside of authentic leadership, and that's what we're supposed to be speaking about. But you touched on the point of sponsorship, and how do you show up in a sponsored relationship? I'm reminded of this. You talk about how your invitations to certain boards have been white men. That's exactly the same for me. It's white men who've reached out and said, I'm going to put my social capital on the line
Mm-hmm.
because I think you've got it in this particular space, and I'm going to put your name forward. Now, assume Nozipo's been put forward. How does Nozipo show up in that sponsored relationship? One, so that she makes the most of it, but two, so she doesn't F it up. Because that's, that's the thing that makes it so difficult to put out social capital for people. I don't think we're honestly thinking about our posture within a sponsored relationship. What would your thoughts be around that?
My response is complex because I am a product of sponsored relationships, and sponsored relationships gone south because of even when you exceed what your sponsor expected you to do. So you're brought in to be a board member, and now you're a chairperson of that board. It's not going to go down well. What I'm trying to say to you is, when you're navigating a sponsored relationship, yes, there's definitely, you must be grateful for the opportunity, but you must also recognize you've been chosen because obviously there's something someone has seen in you. So I think gratitude, but also acceptance of your own power, that there's something in me, there's a skill and there's value in me to add here. And don't be a shadow under your sponsor. Take up that space, you see.
Sure.
And we tend to navigate sponsored spaces as if we're the poor cousins that have been given the next hand-me-down, the newest hand-me-down, and we're so grateful for the opportunity. And I am, and we should be, but also I know what I'm bringing to the table, not arrogance. And I repeat, not arrogance that, oh, I'm so brilliant, whatever, no. But you are on that board for your views. You are on that board for your technical expertise. So it is incumbent upon you to take up that space. And sometimes, like I was saying earlier, it may surprise your sponsor who had placed you at a certain level. Go in there and exceed. So for me, I see every opportunity as an audition. So I come from a drama background. I studied at the National School of Arts. So I always see every one of these things as an audition. You need to show up and make sure that you're giving 110%, because you are also setting the bar and the track record for other Black women who are going to come after you. So don't mess it up. Because once you have one Black woman mess it up, you sit here pointing in case, not that she messed it up, but the perception, it then becomes harder to get another Black woman in that role. And it shouldn't be that way. It really, really shouldn't. And for me, I just think there's so much unrealistic pressure that is placed on us. And also, I want to say, that's why I said it's a complicated view. There's a part of me that says be excellent, but there's also a part of me that I've seen a lot of white men who are not excellent in positions of power. You see?
Yeah.
So it's complex, so why are we always so hard on ourselves? So I juggle between the two. I'm like, sure, be excellent, but it's like, also, we do put a lot of pressure on ourselves because obviously these things don't necessarily come to us as often as they should. And when they do, we almost don't want to mess it up for the next person.
Yeah, you remind me of something that my husband always says, and we debated a lot, and he says, one of the greatest gifts I could give our children is to give them the space to be average. And I always go, I'm like,
I know what you mean.
Right? I'm like, I don't want average kids. But I get it, I get it because...
Especially this generation, because you got a scholarship, you could not fail. Like, that was it. You're here, you know what I mean? So also I tend to find excellence to be, and I hope it breaks for the next generation, right? Excellence is almost like, what do the kids say? It's like it's a Black woman's burden, right? We have this burden of so, and as I grow older, I also allow myself the grace, like I say, to take it easy on myself, because really there is a Steve, a Tom, a Frank out there who is mediocre, but is a CEO, a chairperson of a board, and people are covering him. The issue for that we don't have that coverage.
It's the coverage. So we've got one last question I want to sneak in. When one of the things you mentioned in this conversation, you said one of the basic business 101 rules is, and then you spoke about, for example, not showing your hand. I think it would be so amiss of us, given the business mind that you have, for us not to tap you, Linda, for what are your business 101s? And even if you just give us three, what are the three things that we need to just think about as leaders in business, and in particular, leaders who want to show up as authentic leaders in business? Three things that we can take home tonight.
What's worked for me, and it's been inadvertent because it hasn't been done in an artificial way, make friends with the most powerful person in the room. Identify where the seat of power is and make friends with that person. Not in an artificial way, because they will smell it from afar. So for me, luckily, it's always happened that I'd find myself in a position talking to the most uninteresting person in the room. But I'd find a conversation and they end up being actually the largest shareholder, the most powerful, the game changer. Because usually people of power are not necessarily going to be in the foreground. They'll usually be in the background. So it's important that when you're in a room, authentically, because I'm a person that likes people, in the sense I like to talk. I talk to most people. So make sure you work the room, not from where you perceive a person to be powerful, right? Talk to everyone and you'll understand where the seat of power is. Number two, please understand the value of your network. The time for Joel friends alone is gone. If you're in your 30s, approaching your 40s, Joel time friends is gone. You've got your Joel time friends. But even in that friendship, there needs to be an advantage. And people will say this is very calculating. And no, it's not. I need to be able to say, for example, I am hosting this Women's Day Summit in a week's time. I was able to pick up my phone and say, I need a wine sponsor. Okay, who in my Rolodex? Okay, there. I need a check to fly people in. Who do I have? You need to be able to do that, because also when they look at their Rolodex, if they say, I need an energy expert, I need someone to advise me on looking at this, or you understand? Let's be useful to each other. Friendship is not only about drinking wine and discussing our bad boyfriends, husbands, kids, let's be useful to each other as women. Number three for me, women tend to be humble betties. The time for humble betties is gone. No one is going to wake you up from your bed and say, oh, no, Z, you're so brilliant. I love what you do. No, you have to put yourself out there. No one is going to come knocking to say, oh, I saw you did that presentation. It was so great. And someone is going to think of you for that promotion or think of you for that tender, whatever you do, right? You really need to start packaging yourself and what it is that you do and making yourself visible. I tend to find that women rely a lot on being excellent and hoping someone sees that excellence. What they will do is they will use you and take the spotlight for themselves and the opportunities for themselves. So it's important to put yourself out there and say, hey guys, I'm known for this, I'm known for that. Next time, and when I say this, I'm not lecturing to people. It's a lesson even at my age, like as in today years old, I'm learning to do. I struggled to ask people for favors at times, right? In terms of not let's say I need wine for a conference, no, but for the things that are related to my core business, right? I struggled to say, I need that strategic board seat because it will help my business in XYZ. There, I always hoped people would see my work. You understand, the body of work. But sometimes you may have an excellent body of work, but if you don't actually pick up the phone and say, hey, Nosy, I really want that role. Help me get it. They won't. The worst the person can say is no. But if you don't ask, you're not going to get anywhere.
I think we got more than three in there, but that was absolutely excellent. Linda, thank you so much, guys. The hour's finished. We've even gone to the other side of it. It's been absolutely incredible. And just remember, we don't save it on Instagram. go to my YouTube channel and you can watch this over and over and over again. And I think you probably will. Thank you so much, Linda. You were phenomenal in every sense. I've got notes and notes as you were speaking that I was taking. You were absolutely fantastic. We could not be more appreciative. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for everyone who tuned in as well. Thanks. Bye.
Cheers, Linda. All the
Bye.
best. Bye.